Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. The art market has shifted in several major ways over the last few years. One of the biggest changes in my mind is that artists are now far more public-facing than ever before, particularly when we think about social media and Instagram, where they have the opportunity to shape their own narratives and engage directly with audiences. At the same time, we're seeing a growing number of collaborations between artists and brands. What might once have been viewed as risky or potentially damaging to an artist's reputation is now far more widely accepted, and in many cases embraced as part of a broader creative practice. Against this backdrop, it's interesting to see the emergence of a still niche but steadily growing role in the art world, the artist agent. These are individuals who help artists navigate the increasing complexity of the market, and also identify opportunities that extend beyond traditional gallery sales. Before the idea of an artist agent began to really gain wider traction, the only example that I personally knew of in the contemporary art world was Andrea Crane. After working for several years at Gagosian with the artist Cecily Brown, Andrea left the gallery to work directly with Cecily as her agent or manager. We actually get into that in our conversation about what the correct label is to describe their working relationship. But it's a position that was quite rare at the time, which Andrea still holds today. And Andrea has also gone on to co-found 291 Agency, a visual artist agency built by experienced art world professionals working with several artists. So in this week's episode of the podcast, we chat with Andrea about how her career led her to becoming an artist agent, why this role is more relevant for artists now than ever before, and the different ways in which agencies like hers help artists navigate today's art market. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Andrea, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Adam, for having me. I'm very happy to talk today.
Absolutely. Well, we're really excited to have you on the podcast and chat about your really fascinating and unique career in the art world. So I think a great place to start is with the origins of your relationship with the artist Cecily Brown, which I know stems from your time working at Gagosian. And shortly after leaving the gallery, you became her agent, and you still are today. Can you tell us about how that relationship developed and evolved over time? And what did Cecily see early on that made her feel having an agent was important, especially at a moment in the art world when that was still quite uncommon for artists to have?
When Cecily left Gagosian, her long-term gallery, I think this was in 2013, she didn't want to rush into a new relationship. And, there are people at the galleries who are designated artist liaison, but she felt at the time that an independent person, an independent sounding board made the most sense. And she was entering into a new world of gallery, a constellation-based gallery system rather than one particular gallery that had, places throughout the world. So there was, she wanted someone to handle those relationships. And, she really wanted someone to be front-facing that was independent. Now, we've never said the word agent. We've never used that word. We've come up with a million different monikers for it. They range from, a conciliary to grand vizier, which I personally is my favorite, although I think you get your head chopped off sometimes, but never with Cecily. And, momager is another one that we've used from time to time. So agent was not a word that we have really ever used, but it's the same concept. It's the same paradigm that I'm working with today.
Yeah, and so in the years since you first started working with Cecily, tell me if you agree, I think we've seen a real shift in how artists think about representation and their support structures. From your perspective, what do you think has changed in the art world that now makes the idea of having an agent or manager or some independent person in your corner feel more vital or at least relevant than it did 10 or 20 years ago?
Well, the art world is systematically larger than it was, years ago. There are more private museums, more art fairs, more collectors, more galleries. The influence of artists is broader. Social media is playing a role, and I think that these factors have really triggered this kind of change. Of course, we have agents in film, sports, music, literature. So it seems like a natural progression. And, the art world is a little bit behind some of these other, fields. And, we're still recovering from being a handshake, industry. So not recovering, but we're still known for that. So despite, so many changes, but we've just been a little bit behind in that area.
And so I think the role of the artist agent concept has grown significantly over the last few years. I do think it is still somewhat niche if we think about the overall art world. So I think our listeners would love to learn more about the role of an agent. And about 4 years ago, you actually co-founded 291 Agency, which approaches artist support in a fairly new way for the art world. Tell us what led to the establishment of this agency, and really what kind of gaps are you hoping to fill for artists with it?
So I'm a co-founder of 291 Agency along with Max Teicher, and we have other partners as well, and including Jesse Arison and Risha Murphy. And, we have a whole team, a much larger team of fantastic people. They're different backgrounds, but all from the art world, essentially, in just different capacities. And about 4 years ago, Max called me and he said, he had been watching this relationship with Cecily and was super inspired by it. And he wanted to create an extension of the artist and studio practice, working with galleries, museums, public projects, and, or other sort of out of the box ideas. And he really saw that this was going to be a seismic shift in the art world. And so I think he really was a visionary for this. And, it's 291 is the first all-encompassing talent agency in the art world. To the point where we're getting calls from people regularly on public projects, brands, museums. I mean, we're really growing as a go-to point of contact, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I certainly think your agency has made a name for itself as the leading artist agency, but you also, maybe to a degree intentionally, stay under the radar. So I think the idea of an agency adds a new layer to the very traditional artist-gallery relationship. How do you see the agency fitting within that traditional relationship? Where does the agency step in? Where do you stay out of the way of that? How does that work?
Well, I'm not sure staying out of the way rather than being, sensitive to how, each individual relationship works with their gallery. So, a number of us have gallery backgrounds, so we're very schooled in how these systems work. Most galleries feel we become part of a team to help grow an artist's influence. And some artists prefer hands off with the gallery. They've had these relationships, they prefer to be hands off with the gallery and have us, really talk to the gallery. And others have had years of experience with their gallerists. So we wouldn't step in and get involved if the artist was like, there's no reason. We're super respectful of it all. And each relationship is different. So it's hard to have a blanket statement about how we do act, because we're very sensitive to, to the vagaries of galleries and artists. And we also know that we're new. And so we're sensitive to that as well. But overall, very, very additive, we feel.
And another area that seems increasingly important is helping artists navigate opportunities outside of traditional art sales. That might include brand collaborations, partnerships, really other revenue streams that weren't readily available to artists in the past, or as strongly considered, or even discussed as openly. But it feels like this has all changed so much in the past few years. How do you think the culture around this has changed? And to what extent is it now seen as acceptable for artists to move into these spaces and explore these types of opportunities where previously perhaps it was considered a risky move or something that artists really shouldn't explore?
Well, it's such a great topic because it was so different, a few years ago. And you sort of really like pinpointed that. And we do work on brand partnerships, and we have someone designated very specifically in that area. So we're pretty deep into it. Even 5 years ago, it was a completely different landscape. But now people are viewing it differently. It's another outlet for artists' voices. It can be considered a new form of public art. Personally, I think it's a more democratic way of getting a message out. I had a really interesting heated discussion with a very close friend of mine about, I'd say it was almost 2 years ago. And he said, Andrea, how can you be doing this with brand chips? He's very, very entrenched in sort of the old art world. And he said, how could you? You're like, I don't understand. Georgia O'Keeffe would turn over in her grave if she knew that you were, doing some sort of, trying to have her IP as a pillow or something like that. And I disagree. I think Georgia O'Keeffe would be really excited to be in people's homes who, she ordinarily wouldn't have been able to reach. I think Georgia O'Keeffe would have been psyched to have an alternative revenue stream, and she could turn to Alfred and say, I'm the primary breadwinner here. So I think that Georgia O'Keeffe would not be turning over in her grave. I think she'd be, happy to be able to get her message out to a larger number of people. Would I have thought that 5 years ago? I'm not so sure. I think that the tide has really turned in terms of brand and collaborations. It's a big topic of conversation. I also think, look, my kids, they know Basquiat really well. I mean, you're seeing a lot of this brand collaboration with artists' estates and with Herring, with Basquiat. And I think that has created more exposure for the artists. And, so it's an interesting conversation, and it can be, it just has to be done in a tasteful, appropriate way that would make sense for that particular artist. And, the other thing I would say is that we are also working with estates. So we're looking at all of these different angles and very, very carefully.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, you work with some estates, you work with some very established artists, some mid-career artists. I'm curious what their perspective is on these types of collaboration opportunities with different brands and different types of partnerships when you approach them with these potential opportunities. Are some really eager to participate? Is there still a level of hesitancy from some estates or artists about collaborating with a brand and doing something outside of just making their artworks?
It's a wide range of both. Some people are really like, I want to do this. Others are like, oh gosh, I don't know that brand, but I'm happy to listen and explore it. And I like the idea that, again, visual imagery is getting out there more. And it doesn't have to be just like luxury goods. We are looking at set design and, other ways, again, to get work out there in a way that is more for the general public as well.
And so as we think about the artist agent model moving forward, do you think the future is one where perhaps most artists have an agent or a manager similar to the entertainment world? Or is this model for the art world more suited to very specific types of artists? Put another way, is this a universal need or something that perhaps only fits specific practices or career stages?
Well, I think we're seeing this field start is burgeoning, and the word agent is becoming used, more and more every single day. So I believe that every artist and every artist estate should have an agent. It's completely additive. And I suspect that, we're headed in that direction. And that's, we think everybody should have an agent.
Andrea, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast and sharing your really valuable perspective and sharing stories about your journey in your career in the art world to become one of the pioneer artist agents. If our listeners want to learn more about 291 Agency, what's the best website for them to visit?
Well, our website does not reveal so much, but it's 291agency.com. We try to be as discreet as possible.
That certainly makes sense. Thanks so much again, Andrea. Really appreciate it.
Adam, thanks for having me. It's great to see you.